Okay, thank you. We are ready to start, and you will attend the kind of methodology that we have done during this 1 year and a half of studying the strange rules. So welcome to everybody, and welcome to our curators. And Zurich is our leading, and we have here almost all artists involved in the show. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adriana. I want to thank, of course, you and Holly and Matt for this extraordinary journey of hundreds of conversations, which we've all transcribed, and it's going to be an exciting book. I want to thank, of course, Nicolas Berggruen for the invitation to do the show here, Mario Codognato, the director, who is also here today. And we want to thank, of course, foremost, all the artists who are here with us, who participated on this journey and have made amazing new work for this show. We have Agnieszka Kurant with us, we have Ayoung Kim, Fabien Giraud, Joshua Citarella, Lawrence Abu Hamdan, Lorenzo Senni, new models, Primavera De Filippi, Denny, Sougwen Chung, and Trevor Paglen. Please give them a very warm welcome. I want to thank also the amazing team here at Palazzo Diedo, and of course also the additional artists in the show who are not here with us today because they were here to install and have already left or are going to come later. Avery Singer, Zike He, Ho Zun Yen, Ken Stanley, Lynn Hirschman-Leeson, Michael Levin, and of course also the Worms. We are very grateful to the Worms for the daily performance, and then Philippa Reno, Stephanie Dinkins, and Venkatesh Rao. We are also very, very grateful, of course, to Caroline Busta of New Models and Adel Köchlin for all the work on the book. And very special thanks also go to Olivier Berggruen. And it's now my immense pleasure to kick off this conversation. We're just going to hear from all the artists participating in the exhibition. And Holly and Matt, I wanted to begin with you because our dialogue started exactly 8 years ago, when Ben Vickers and I interviewed you about algo raves and how basically algo raves function. We did an interview for Wired magazine and have not stopped talking ever since. And the dialogue, of course, then intensified very much when we did the exhibition at Serpentine, the Call, curated by Eva Jäger, where we literally spoke every day for 18 months, and we just continued these conversations in a way over these 8 years ever since. I'm also very grateful to Bettina Korek, the Serpentine CEO, who is here today, and to our trustee, Robert Rosenkrantz, who is with us. And Sougwen has now arrived. We should give another big round of applause for the performance. And yes, these many conversations Holly and Matt had often to do already 8 years ago, really, with you talking about protocol and this idea of protocol art. And we try to summarize it in this exhibition of strange rules, where actually protocol art is a practice that engages with the underlying rules that dictate how culture is produced, how it's distributed, and how it's perceived in a digital age. And I wanted to ask you to maybe tell us a little bit when you started to see this as a pattern that connects so many practices.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. I think this was like a tension. We used to live in the Bay Area, so we lived in the Bay Area around about the Web 2 boom when the platform economy was being built. And so living kind of between both worlds, having friends working at Facebook and so on and so forth, and friends in music and art, it became harder and harder to ignore that the people working within these large organizations were having this kind of unprecedented impact on culture. And so the question became then, if you wanted to actually have an impact on culture, what is the kind of ideal substrate to be operating on? And so when we started all the interviews for the curatorial process for this, the opening kind of provocation that we started with was to say that, do you agree or disagree that the people having the most impact on culture right now are programming protocols or platforms, or making work that lives within the protocols and platforms? And almost unanimously, people did not disagree with the provocation. But the question then is what to do. And so, yeah, the curation of the show and a lot of the work that I think we all admire is kind of taking on that or acknowledging that kind of new reality. And so thinking about how to work upstream, let's say, of traditional media, to make systems that others can use, to make systems that perhaps intervene in the rules or norms of everyday life, or to kind of look from a more maybe anthropological or kind of critical lens at how these systems indeed are playing a role in culture. Yeah, but it's been a long process. I'd say 10 to 15 years, and it's not becoming any less urgent.
Yeah, just to, I don't know, reiterate, we're really looking at where the site of creative intervention is happening these days. And for us, it really felt like it was upstream from the specific piece of media or object or performance. It really was a kind of logic that lived upstream of that. And we were trying to kind of grapple with how to bring that into a form. We've talked a lot about form, how it's so difficult to bring form to practices that encompass networked communities or, very kind of like online native practices, or even to kind of discuss the complexities that we're learning about AI systems. And, so finding a form for this is really what this exhibition, I think, was about, kind of grappling with that. And just to shout out, it was really, really helpful to be able to work with Sub, the incredible architecture studio, who helped us find a lot of that form and helped us really bring this into a kind of language that I think the audience can hopefully engage with these ideas. But yeah, we're really excited to bring in all of these artists who are asking these similar questions and really grappling with what does it mean to make art in the 21st century.
And maybe before we start to ask the different artist questions, as a last question to you, it's kind of beautiful that we're having this talk actually within your piece. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit more how it actually works. I think it would be interesting for everybody to hear about that.
Sure. So Matt and I really like to think about how AI systems are changing the kind of rituals and the ways that we are engaging with public space and the way that we are behaving with one another in those public spaces. So we see ourselves moving from a kind of read-only public space to a read-write public space, a public space that you can also contribute to. So you'll notice there are microphones hanging everywhere. You'll notice that what I'm saying is being transcribed on the tiny little monitor back there. Everything is being fed into our agentic system that is, forever kind of listening within this space. We tried to build a kind of parliamentary feeling in this room because we wanted to kind of magnify all of the work that Berggruen has been doing, bringing public discourse, philosophical debate into this hall. And so we wanted to make use of that and bring that in to be part of this piece. So everything, all of the lectures, everything that happens in this space will be recorded. It's being debated and argued through our agentic system that maybe, Matt, you want to talk a little bit more about. And then right now we're in kind of performance mode, but when it switches back to installation mode, you can hear the agents discussing what has been said through a musical system that we've written to kind of translate their native language.
Yeah, I can maybe add a little bit more about the protocol. The provocation we're running with at this point in time is that compute, so the raw kind of computation power that fuels a lot of machine learning is quickly becoming a currency, but also context is quickly becoming a currency. So the ability for machines to learn, or spaces like this to learn from people. There's a really interesting kind of convergence happening at the moment where there's a lot of people in the arts, maybe some in this room, who are having anxiety about their place in the world as a result of the fact that machines can make really cool images now, and videos and sounds and so on. What I'd like to report on the other side, which is maybe less commonly reported, is that same anxiety is being felt by software developers. Because now you can pretty much automate any kind of software short of kernel development, and I think that will change in the next year. And so the question then becomes, when you can technically automate anything into existence, right? You can automate any film, you can automate any image, you can automate any piece of software. The hardest question to answer is actually what and why, what you want and why you want it. And so what's interesting about that is that, far from the cause of art being somewhat irrelevant in this context, I think that actually public art spaces like this take on a new relevance, which is to say that, for 100 years, contemporary art has not really been concerned about how beautiful someone can paint something, right? The question is why, what, how, when, its context. And so if anything, I actually think that contemporary art will take on a whole new life now that almost everyone is going to have to confront this question of kind of consensus value. And so we really like to think, again, in this tradition that I think the Berggruen Institute is starting out, and it's really like to see these spaces as places to encounter context and contribute to context. And I think that habit and that ritual will only become more important.
Thank you so much, Holly and Matt. And Holly and Matt and I are now going to ask questions to the participating artists, and you will find out more about, their works in the show. And maybe we can begin with Lawrence Abu Hamdan. We should give Lawrence a very warm welcome. Maybe, Lawrence, we had many conversations with you. The methodology was really that we had infinite conversations over Zoom with the artists in the exhibitions, initially about protocol and then concretely about the work in the show. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the protocol inherent in your work and the protocols you develop or you've seen develop, because of course a lot of your work has to do with investigating audio and sound in a variety of ways for many years. It would be great to hear, before we talk about the piece specifically, how this connects to protocol.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, so I run an organization called Earshot, and we do audio analysis, audio research for human rights. It's a human rights organization that uses sound to defend and shape what human rights could be. So, for example, if you know that the tank that killed Hind Rajab was 12 meters away, that's, from our work. If you know what weapon was used to attack a Serbian silent vigil in Belgrade, then it's also our work. And so we do a lot of work for media, we do a lot of work for international NGOs, we do a lot of work for grassroots organizations. And I think when we were starting the conversation on protocol art, the question became how we're using this sort of latest, the cutting edge of what AI and other new methodologies are being kind of opened up and being made available in the space of audio. The one thing we're building right now is actually a kind of like ear witness technology, a way to interview people who have heard crimes and not seen them. And it's not so direct when you describe sound. Language quickly fails. And so we found this opportunity to try to sort of rethink the prompt for synthetic audio, to try and think about how you could ask very sound-specific questions. Was it sharp like glass breaking, or sharp like the edge of a door hitting a door stopper, right? So I mean, I think people think through their world acoustically, not really in a linguistic way, and we're trying to develop some technology to actually help intervene and make those interviews really constructive for the first time, not treat ear witness as a second-rate version of eyewitness testimony. So that's where the conversation began.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're thinking and using the voice? Something that's very dear to me, and it's such an interesting site to think about AI systems and, whose voice is being trained on, how is it being used, and that is, of course, something that speaks to the work Waterfalls Upstairs. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So the work upstairs is actually about an emergent form of AI that is not replacing people's jobs. It's actually just replacing their voices. So it's for call center. It's called accent softening technology. It softens call centers' accents. So from India, Philippines, Pakistan, and Haiti. And the idea is it kind of like addresses xenophonia, which is at the heart of the kind of cultural exchange between people on the global south who are making those calls and the people in the global north who are receiving them. And they're trying to find a way to soften and sort of make obscure that supply chain of the human voice. And so what we were looking at was the specific algorithms that they're using to do that, that accent softening, a particular company. I'm not sure if I should mention them. But what we were able to do is actually reverse engineer those algorithms and find the voices underneath the softened version and look at the sort of process by which those accents are being reformed. And so I'm using this spectral 3D visualization of the voice, which looks like a kind of topography. So again, relating accent to place and its transformation.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. Big round of applause. Thank you. And I thought in a transition now, basically from the topic of the lecture of Sougwen, we should maybe talk about Michael Levin, because of course we have the silkworms, but we also have the installation here of Michael Levin. And from the beginning, I think, of this project, it was really important to us that we have participants who are visual artists, that we have participants who are engineers, that we have participants who are scientists. And we were always talking about Michael Levin, who has been of a great fascination for Holly and Matt and many artists, who has been working with protocols related to worms of persuadability. It's not a genetic basically intervention, it goes through persuadability. And I just wonder, before we talk about the silkworms, ask maybe Holly and Matt to explain a little bit why this installation is so central in the show. And it was also a great saga, because literally the worms arrived from Boston the day of the opening.
Go for it.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to the worms. I mean, one of the provocations of this show is that if we're going to be surfacing protocols as artworks, it's also important to acknowledge that many people developing these protocols don't necessarily come from an art school background. And so it's quite nice to invite Michael and also Ken Stanley, I think, to be chief representatives of this. The idea with Michael Levin, he's taken many incredible projects, but this is actually quite an old experiment. And what it's pointing to is that if you can hijack bioelectric signals, you can actually convince or persuade a living thing to take a different path. And so the planarian worms that are, we do actually have live worms here, but we only bring them out on occasion. We might do so after this marathon. The planarian worm is particularly interesting for experiments because they regenerate their heads. So if you cut them, they will regenerate. So ostensibly it creates a kind of feedback loop where you can change something, cut, see what happens, change something, cut, see what happens. And so what he and his lab found is that by changing the kind of bioelectric environment in the Petri dish, you can persuade this worm to grow two heads. And what's really fascinating about this is that once you cut that worm, they will always grow two heads. So this is a persistent change to their kind of physical destiny, let's say.
And then, of course, we also have Ken Stanley in the exhibition, actually with the pig breeder project. And particularly, I would say, his book, The Greatness Cannot Be Planned, was also very much an inspiration from the curatorial methodology. The fact that innovation, in a way, is not driven by a narrow focus, because that clearly wasn't the case here. There was no narrow focus, but by a serendipity of discovery and by unexpected kind of encounters. And I think Adriana, I don't know where Adriana is now, just here. Adriana, you can maybe talk a little bit, because we worked so closely with you, co-curating the show, about this whole methodology, which you always described as unusual.
Well, it's unusual because we have several heads also, and not only several guests. So the methodology is great, and now we are like watching this lively. And I think we met from all over the world, more than 50 contributors, artists, scientists, researchers. And so one of the most funny thing, I think, was the usual presentation by Matt, like, we are going to record you also. And actually, this is also what we are doing now. And maybe this big archive would be part of the show and part of the process. So you are the master of this, Ulrich.
And I want to ask Sougwen now, thank you again for this amazing performance you've just done for us. And I was fascinated when actually Bettina Kurgan and I came to your studio the other day to see these silkworms in your studio and see that you actually work with these artworks as living organisms. So I wanted to ask you to maybe tell us a little bit about this idea, how this connects, and also the way you work with the weaving machine as the computer and as a program.
I'm really honored to be here to be able to share some of this emerging work with you. It's very work in progress, but it will be developing at quite a rapid pace over the next few years. So I think what really drew me to working with the silkworm is that I've been working with robotic systems for the past 10, 12 years, really thinking about what that human and machine coupling means. I think in the purpose for the function of my art practice, it's been quite metamorphic in nature. I've been able to not only explore a little bit more what it is to move in an artistic practice, but what it is to translate those signals into kind of machinic other. And it led me to actually some research around Michael Levin's work, obviously, but this idea that bioelectricity and the signal through brainwave meditation, which is what I have been doing in my latest iteration of drawing operations, DOUG for short, what that might mean when that substrate, that bioelectricity, can be translated through a different type of materiality, which actually the silkworm affords us through its cocoon. Said in a very performative way in my performance lecture that I just showed. But I found it really interesting. What happens to the coupling of human and machine when the silkworm can produce a substrate that can integrate that loop back into the body? And that's exactly what the proteins of silk fibrin allow us to do. I have silkworms in the studio because I also really want to interrogate the ethics of what that means to build with and shape not only an organism for my own artistic and engineering curiosities, but also what it means to make with another living organism. So we've been really facilitating their metamorphosis, and that's led into a very long rabbit hole about human and non-human couplings beyond the mechanism, and how we can maybe even rewild this existing coupling towards something that really challenges who we are as human beings. So that's the short version of what I've been exploring with Realm of Silk.
I was wondering how you're thinking about scale, because your practice is so embodied, and you've been working with these larger-than-life kind of machines, and now you're working at a much smaller kind of biological scale. So how do you mitigate that?
I'm still working through that, actually. But I love the idea that the system itself isn't this apparatus that extends the gesture, but maybe a living habitat in which the scale becomes the physical system that engenders this metamorphosis for this animal that's been very underserved by human behavior. So yeah, we're building out. We're building out.
Big round of applause for Sougwen. And as you can see here, and I think that's true for your work, but for most of the works in the show, the artwork is no longer merely, a final product. It's a process governed by instructions, and in that sense, it represents the invisible architecture that then, enables actually the experience with the work. And that is really a big shift, no? Because it goes from an artwork as an object really to a system. And that brings us right away to our next speaker, to Joshua Citarella. A very warm welcome to Joshua. And Joshua, together with new models, you have conceptualized and curated the online marketplace of ideas. We wanted to ask you about the process of research and selection of these incredible items, of these many, many different items in the show.
It's sometimes referred to as a memeplex, these interlocking ideas. So some of them are the things that float to the top of search engine optimized news feeds. Other things emerge organically from mimetic communities online. I think the top line for the exhibition that we were thinking of, echoing some of Matt's statements earlier, was that we're in an era, and this has been true for a number of years now, where alternative media has become larger than legacy media, and this has inverted our conventional notions of the fringe and the mainstream. So you see an enormous mix, a very expansive survey of things that were a few years ago very marginal, very niche, and have all of a sudden become incredibly influential. So in the cases of some of these, let's say, crypto organizations, they were relatively small and now immensely well capitalized. There are groups that couldn't get a platform before in the linear media to reference Carly's famous phrase for this, the linear media model, and now are, hundreds of thousands or millions of viewers every week. And so I think what we're trying to look at in reference to protocol art is that there's this enormous, very noisy contestation of symbols and signs in what we call the content layer. We've been talking about this for almost a decade now. And this has, in some ways, occluded the underlying material infrastructures and platform economies that have reorganized our entire world in that time. And so what I like most about this exhibition is looking at voices, editorial voices from seemingly opposite sides of the political spectrum that utilize not only the identical graphic design, literally the same t-shirt stock, the same DTG printing, the same heat press printing, doing on-demand production and just-in-time fulfillment, and so it becomes greater than the sum of its parts. You begin to see the entirety of this new platform economy.
Thank you. Yeah, we were discussing the protocol wars early on and how this merch store could really communicate that. I think you guys did an amazing job. Did you want to ask Josh something?
You got to be careful with the two of us because we'll keep
Yeah,
going.
So, I think it's actually good to know, and I'd like this to be explained to the group, that when you're actually going in there, I did pick up on a bunch of Easter eggs. There's a bunch of interesting clusters that have kind of come together. It's kind of nice because it is very much a choose your own adventure, but I feel like there is a little bit of a finger on the scale. I wonder if you could point to any of the Easter eggs in there.
Well, there's, I think, very prominently in the hero shot, there's all of the kind of, what I would say, like the immediate contemporary canon that it's very visible. My own sympathies are with this kind of left accelerationist camp, which is very prominently featured. Carly and I, during the install, made some very choice kind of curations. I think that my favorite, or at least I'll speak to the parts that I put together, there's the famous Deleuze cover for Anti-Oedipus, next to Inventing the Future, next to Taylor Lorenz, next to Nick Land. It's a real mess, but the irony is I opened my newsfeed this morning and I saw all of these people. So that curation, I think it tells you something right there.
Yeah, I have to say, I found it quite emotional and cathartic to go in there. Someone brought up Hot Topic, and I was like, yeah, this is perfect.
It was an influence.
Like, you just stumbled upon the best franchise ever. Slop Topic, thank you.
Thank you so much. Big round of applause for Joshua. And it's now my immense pleasure to ask a first question to Primavera De Filippi. A very warm welcome to Primavera. So Primavera, you have also accompanied this research from the very beginning because you've actually run seminars on protocol art, and you've also written a seminal text called Protocolism, Shifting Paradigms in Art and Copyright. So maybe we can begin with that, and you could tell us a little bit about that research. And the text in particular is relevant for the topic here.
Yeah, so I'm originally a legal scholar, and my focus has been mostly what is the implication of digital technology on copyright. I'm also a strong advocate of open source, Creative Commons, and all these alternative licensing scheme. And also, as an artist, I've been always embracing digital technology and looking at how it can enhance artistic practice in addition to disrupting some of them. My practice, but it kind of appeared more retrospectively because I didn't observe this protocolism or protocol art approach immediately, has always been to use technological artifact in order to create systems that create artworks. And what I think is happening, especially today because of generative AI, is that it is becoming increasingly popular to go upstream and to explore systems that create works. And so in my initial conceptualization, but then we spoke with Matt, and I guess I have a slightly broader vision of protocol art as well. But in my original conceptualization, the idea was the protocolism is that practice in which the creative endeavor goes specifically into designing and constructing a protocol which can then be instantiated by any other human or machine. So generative art is an obvious obvious application of protocol art in which you create the software that then you give to the machine, and the machine generates an infinity of artworks. But there is so many other ways of creating protocols. I guess the archetypical example would be like Cell Levitt, which you don't need technology because you have humans that can instantiate your protocol. And so for me, it's very interesting with regard to copyright, because oftentimes new technologies are regarded as endangering the reproducibility and therefore the copyright. And there is always this desire of preventing copying. And when we move upstream, when we actually push the creative endeavor into the construction of the protocol, what becomes very interesting is that reproduction actually is part of the game. And as a protocol artist, you are the most successful when as many people as possible are now replicating and instantiating your protocol. And we can no longer talking about copying or reproduction, because we're actually talking about the generation of a new work every time the protocol is being instantiated. And so a lot of the copyright issues that we are discussing are hardly applicable in the context of a protocol artist, because no one copied the protocol, people just instantiate that protocol.
Hear, hear. I've got a couple of things to ask. So we were having a conversation the other day about specifically EAT, so Billy Kluver's EAT. This is, and while we were talking about it, we talked about it in the context of this residency that you've put together, the Glitch residency that I think the room should probably know about. And the closest thing I could come to is being like, no, Glitch is better than EAT because you're building real stuff. Explain.
Yes, I can explain. So for the purpose of the room, Glitch is an arts and tech residency that started 5 years ago in Burgundy. I think quite a few people in this room have been, and hopefully will be. And it's basically this very anti-disciplinary group of artists, engineers, philosophers, researchers, etc., that live together for between 2 to 3 weeks in a very beautiful kind of this palace. And what happened is that, as opposed to traditional residency in which the people are expected to do work on their own during the time, the idea is actually come with almost nothing in your hands so that you spend as much time as possible cross-pollinating. And very interesting things came out of it. In addition to a lot of artistic collaboration, there is also, because there is engineers, and engineers also oftentimes realize they have just as much creativity as artists. There is a lot of protocols that are created, so protocols that can then be used in order to be used by artists to instantiate into their own artworks. And we have, for instance, like we have like a lot of NFT plus protocol that emerged. We have like generative AI, real-time generative AI system that came out of it. And increasingly, those works are actually made in the name of the collective. So it's not like one particular person that claims authorship on this, but it's a collective effort, because none of those things would have been created without the collective contribution of everyone. And I think that there is really this intentionality towards what we're building here is itself an artwork, because it is a protocol that artists can use, and everyone that can contribute into this toolkit becomes potentially a co-author. So one specificity also with copyright about protocol art is that if I create a protocol and then another artist takes this protocol and instantiates it, that outcome is both an art piece authored by the instantiator, but it also has the aura, it also has like the contribution of the protocol artist that made the protocol, and so to some extent it enabled this kind of asynchronous collective works in which people keep reusing things, but again, every usage that is made of a particular protocol is also part of the body of work of this protocol artist, and therefore you collaboratively participate into every single creation that is made of it.
One very quick follow-up. I remember 3 years ago when you invited us to a palace in Buckerberg, and we were sitting in the den discussing, trying to come up with a working definition of protocol art. And one area of disagreement, I remember, was whether or not intention was important. And I believe for you it was important, and for you it was not important. So I'm curious where you stand today.
I would say it's contextual. So I think the intention is important if the context is not clear. So as a protocol artist, if I'm a developer and I just make a piece of code, is it protocol art or not? It will depend on how it's perceived. And so if I define myself as a protocol artist, then it will be perceived as a piece of art. If I don't, then it will only be perceived as such. Is contextually, it becomes obvious that it is the artwork that then other artists can also use. So I think it helps. It helps a lot when the context is not sufficiently detailed to make it clear that there is this creative endeavor in the protocol. And I think also as time goes, and this exhibition is contributing to it, as people start being more attuned to the idea that a protocol can be an art piece as opposed to the outcome of the protocol, then perhaps the intention will be less necessary because we are more used of looking at the protocol as artworks.
Thank you so much. Big round of applause for Primavera. And there are so many, I think, things here which connect. I mean, of course, you mentioned Sol Levitt, and it's interesting. We think about, analog protocols. For me, with this exhibition, Do It, we started in '93 with Boltanski and Lavier, a show which, never stopped, which is kind of interesting. It's been on the road for 30 years, and it's just writing instructions, recipes, protocols, and of course it involves Fluxus artists with open scars, it involves conceptual artists. It might also be interesting for those of you who haven't seen it to visit the Joseph Kossuth exhibition in the second venue of Berggruen here in Venice, because of course one of the pioneers of conceptual art, connects very much to this idea of protocol. The other thing I think which is important is maybe the aspect also to involve practitioners from many disciplines in an exhibition. Sometimes something I always believed in. We did it with Laboratorium, with Barbara van der Linden in the late 90s when we got Bruno Latour and Isabel Stengers and Peter Gallison and Caroline Jones to co-curate with us a show. And Latour had this great idea to do the tabletop experiment. And in a way, that's something we did here. You heard about Levin, you heard about Stanley, but of course, there is also and always Venkatesh Rao. And Venkatesh Rao, probably one of the authors we've quoted most over the last years, and it's true, I think, for both of you and also for me. Venkatesh Rao is a pivotal figure for artists and technologists alike, very known for his reflections on emerging technologies. And he has actually, Primavera has written, essays on these seminars. He has founded a whole institute called the Protocol Institute, a research organization dedicated only to the study of protocols. And we are extremely delighted to now welcome Simon Denny, who collaborated with Venkatesh Rao. A very warm welcome. And Simon, I remember when we worked on your exhibition at Serpentine many years ago, curated with Emma Enderby, Venkatesh Rao was already in the room, and it's really great that you collaborated here with Venkatesh. And I wanted to ask you to explain us how this all connects to the Gramsci gap.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Hans-Ulrich and Matt and Holly also for suggesting the collaboration. I've been a long-time reader and thinker with and about Venkatesh, but to work directly with him was something that really came out of this exhibition as a suggestion, which I'm really grateful for. And Venkatesh and I struck up a conversation of about what would be making sense to do here. I'd read a number of his texts. And a recent one was called Be Slightly Monstrous, and it was about leaning into the emergence of the monstrous after the sort of very often retold Antonio Gramsci quote, the old world is dying, the new one is being born, now is the time of monsters. And it coincided with something that I've been looking into in terms of a resurgence of interest from capital allocators, maybe another type of protocol, into the history of art and the history of avant-gardes. I was looking into people that were investing in defense tech and their interest in Marinetti and the Italian futurists. And Venkat and I back and forth about that and thought, yeah, there's something about the monstrous emerging in the context of capital allocators unearthing and redeploying futurism today. So using some of Venkat's own drawings, he was making also kind of like a protocol art system of his own to produce images, and some of the research I'd been doing around which artists were being kind of restored, so Giacomo Balla, Tullio Crelli, and mixing them with advertising images from companies like Anduril and Palantir, bringing that all together to kind of make protocolized paintings. So upstairs you see a room of these paintings that maybe show us the emergence of a time of monsters between eras. Yeah.
One of the things I love about your work is how context aware it is, you know, the time and place in which it sits, and I think that's what makes it so possible to have these kind of dialogues with Venkatesh's work, but also with Harold Cohen's work, which you also feature heavily in your room. Can you talk a little bit about what Cohen's work is doing there and why you chose to also exhibit him alongside your own work?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there was something else that came out of our conversation as well. Harold Cohen is, I think, very much revered in the context of art and technology, and particularly working early with AI systems to make kind of robotically produced paintings. And that was something that I'd been doing when looking into this kind of defense tech futurism role. I was working with plotting pens and making brushes be moved by robots. Harold Cohen's work in the room is something that brings together robots trying to make very organic forms. He was always trying to produce something very, I think, from what I understand it, very humanistic. It has even kind of a Matisse vibe about it, I think. And so for me, I saw kind of the aspirations of the liberal world, maybe one side of the Gramsci gap being represented by this beautiful, hopeful painting, and maybe some of the darker forces emerging, straight lines, jagged edges that were in my work. It seemed to be that this was a great counterpoint to this futurism. Yeah.
Big round of applause for Simon Denny. Yeah, and Holly, Matt and I were really excited also that you brought Harold Cohen into the mix, because we think it's really relevant now with AI to also look at pioneering artists who basically have done work with it for a very long time. It's a similar thing, like if you look at art and video games, you know, that finally a focus is on artists like Rebecca Allen, who has worked with video games for more than 40 years, and I think, you know, with Cohen it's the same. It's worked for many, many decades, and I think the same is true for Lynn Hirschman-Leeson, whom we want to honor here and celebrate here, who has a film also in the exhibition, who is one of the very first artists really who have done a film with AI. And that's, of course, a longer durational perspective, and that brings us right away to Fabien Giraud. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Fabien. Now, Fabien, I wanted to ask you to tell us about your film, which is upstairs, because there are several protocols that make up the layers of your film called The Ferals. There are actors in the film who will reappear throughout the years and grow and change. So we have here, you know, through AI, the artwork clearly as a as a living organism. There is also a language in the film, an endangered language called Occitan. I think what is also very fascinating is that you worked with protocols, but you trained the AI not with images, but actually with real materials, with archaeological, geological findings. And in all of that is, of course, a very long durational perspective, because as I mentioned, the film goes on 1,000 years, fully shot by artificial intelligence, so it's 32 generations. So it's very Fernand Braudel, it's longue durée.
Yes, thank you. I must confess also that before you invited me to participate in this show, I never thought of my work as taking part in protocol art. I never thought of it this way. But then I had to think about it. And maybe at the heart of the Pharaoh project is a very old very old protocol, which is parenting. We've been doing that for quite a while now, as humans, as a species. And what the point of departure for the Pharaoh project is really this idea that collectively, as a species, on a terrestrial scale, we've become parents of an inhuman child or inhuman children, and that we don't really think of that seriously enough, I think, because being a parent brings great responsibility. I mean, in raising your child, but also in the way it transforms you in return. It's a feedback movement. So we're being transformed by the parenting that we do to these machines. When I say parenting, it's obviously because these machines, they listen to us, they look at us, and they behave a certain way because they've seen us behave that way. So this parenting was really the point of departure, and I and we, because it's a collective work, the Pharaoh, we acquired this land in the middle of France, in Massif Central, in Limousin, and that place became. We wanted to turn that place, which is forests, rocks, trees, streams, a big natural place, to turn it into a training ground or a parenting ground for a machine, a specifically built machine on site. So in that way, it inscribes itself in a very long anthropology, and it's AI is, it's in the continuation of this parenting process, except that now for the first time in history, we're getting to this stage of parenting something which will not necessarily be human. That's very important. It's a new thing. So that's what I can say very briefly.
One of the things that I love about your project is that you're treating training data as art itself, as a really important site for creativity and art creation. And in order to do that, you're walking the walk. You've bought the mountain, your family lives there, you're climbing it, your son is crawling through the mud. Can you talk a little bit about how all in you are on this project? Because I didn't really fully understand the scale until we had a studio visit.
Well, I think we are all in, all together. It's not just me on the hill. I'm just replicating it in a more dramatic way, because it's also my family village, and I'm doing it there with my children and friends, but that's what's happening to us collectively, because every emotions, every patterns of affects that we have is being scrutinized and predated by machines. So in a way, I wanted to fall in and grab and hug this condition of our contemporary condition. And also, the whole idea is that in the film that you see here, it's set, as Hans Ulrich said, it's set in an ancient time. So it's the first lesson to the machine. It's the first training cycle. So it's set 1,000 years ago on this hill. And they speak a language that there's no LLM for, 11th century Occitan, that we had to revive with linguists. But it's the very basic idea of this project to pluralize these models, these learning models, with past worlds or worlds that did not exist or could have existed but did not, but also multiple ontologies that are present in this world, and to try to take the machine learning process out of this looping present of late capitalism that we are in, trying to pluralize in that sense. So that's what we're trying to do there. Thank you.
Big round of applause for Fabien. Thank you so much. And please join me all now in giving a very, very warm welcome to our next speaker, Ayoung Kim. I want to ask Ayoung Kim, of course, about the dancer in the mirror field. We can actually see the work from here. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's in the courtyard. Also, after the talk will be a great occasion to revisit all the works in the exhibition. Now, Dancer in the Mirror Field is very much a reflection on, as you said and as you told us, as a reflection basically on the contemporary obsession with efficiency and the performative effects it has on bodies in the service of wider technological and economic forces. And in a way, it connects very much to Stanley's book, about greatness not being planned, because in this book he talks a lot about the limits this focus actually on efficiency has in terms of actually very often preventing innovation. So I wanted to ask you, tell us about this work, about the dancer in the mirror field, and maybe also about the protocol, which in a way govern this obsession for efficiency, and how you kind of then translate them into your work and also interrogate the technology through that.
Sure. The Dancer in the Mirror Field is a single channel video, probably a bit different from many other participating artists' pieces. It's very narrative driven, but it's a silent film because it was initially made for a facade in the M+ Museum last year. I should also mention this one. It's not really a promotion, but it was made possible to include that piece in the exhibition with the kind permission of the Powerhouse Museum, because it was supposed to be exhibited in Powerhouse Museum for the first time as a re-edited version later this year. So thanks to the Powerhouse Museum. It is one of the pieces among the Deliberate Dancer series that I started from 2022. It's revolving around this fictional Deliberate Dancer company platform. And the female career driver, she's always struggling to cope with the limited time and the shortest distance condition. And every time she does her delivery work, she receives the calls and alarms by the master algorithm called the dance master in the overarching fiction. So it's about this vulnerability of the body and the urge to optimize our body condition according to this technology advancement and techno-precarity also at the same time. And in this version particularly, I talk a lot about, you can consider this as the most exaggerated version of this kind of protocol in a way. So it's my kind of dystopian or kind of black humorous version, how, if they receive this very strange kind of conundrum kind of messages from the master algorithm, and then the riders, individual riders, they have to understand and even comprehend what it means, and then what they need to deliver, accomplish according to the rules, and also wayfinding to find the shortest distance. So there are 3 protagonists. They're all identical as much as the previous productions. So the protagonist Ernst Mo, 3 different versions of themselves. They have to fight each other, sometimes in a very physical action fighting sequences unfold. And in some extent, I really wanted to portray their fighting and kind of distracting each other to get over and then to win the race, to get the title of the best delivery dancer of the year award. But in a way, their entangled movement is also kind of very erotic and romantic caressing in the world. So there's a very blurred line between fighting and lovemaking.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have a comment that I hope turns into a question. But it's funny because obviously when conducting all the interviews, we came out with this provocation to say, the people writing these protocols were having the most influence on culture. And when we did that, of course, we were thinking mainly in the domain of art or entertainment or social life or so on. But what I really appreciate about this work and the amount of time that you spent putting together this series is that, of course, in many other domains of life, it's a far less abstract connection, right? There are people in the Uber driver or the delivery driver world who are already very used to having their daily life driven by a person or a boss that they can never talk to.
Sure,
right?
sure.
And so in a sense there, the experience of the Uber driver or the delivery driver, and particularly your COVID story I think is very powerful, is something that should be studied because I think that that's going to become much more common, right? So it starts with the Uber driver and the delivery driver, and before you know it, it will be almost everybody else. So it's a comment, but I just wanted to re-emphasize it for the point of this, because that's where I really see the protocol connection and why it's valuable. Yeah.
And I would like to comment one more thing probably. When I was researching about this, how those delivery platforms function and what is the kind of system behind how it iterates this every messages and alarms which put the human being into anxiety in a certain level. There were some movements, kind of you can call it alternative tech movement or minor tech movements happened in Indonesia. I don't think it still exists, but probably 3-4 years ago there was this bunch of the collective power working in the delivery companies. They kind of hacked the delivery app that they are utilizing and then put certain different functions like enlarging the text, like a very basic kind of option, to hacking their position, like pinning their position, kind of, smuggling the position, and then it kind of responded to their more kind of use value for their safety and things. So it seemed quite interesting kind of interrogation and intervention to the existing system.
Big round of applause for Ayoung Kim. Thank you so much. And I just want to reiterate this wonderful partnership with the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney, which is an institution very much also, of course, connected to the topics we're discussing here of new experiments in art and technology. It's now my immense pleasure to invite our next guest. A very warm welcome to Agnieszka Kurant. Agnieszka is also presenting in the exhibition. You can find it in the bookstore. It's a collaboration also with Berggruen. A very, very comprehensive new book on her practice called Collective Intelligence, written by Caroline Christoph Bagakiev. But here in the exhibition, you present two works, a film called Phantomatics, and then I want to particularly ask you about the new work Wordoid, a communication from mind to mind, rather than oral or gestural. You described it as a work in the form of a holographic short film that actually records the brain activity of multiple people simultaneously. So it employs medical technology to study the brain, and the captured signals are then processed by AI, which transforms them into three-dimensional shapes that appear in space in holograms, in hologramic form. So we actually see it as not as an image conceived by you as the artist, but as a translation of mental stages. And I think in a very interesting way we'll hear more about this later on, also from Trevor Paglen. There is a very interesting connection between your two works there. But before that, I wanted to ask you to tell us more about the protocols which influence your work in general, and particularly the making of Wordoid.
Thank you so much, Hans-Ulrich. Thank you, Matt and Holly and Adriana, for this invitation. I'm really honored to be part of Strange Rules. So all my work revolves around the questions of collective intelligence, and collective intelligence can be understood as a form of protocol, essentially, thinking about AI as a global system of exploitation of collective intelligence of millions of users. Algorithms are being trained on data from millions of people. So in my work since about 15 years, I've been using various methods, sometimes very analogous, because I also think that to talk about cutting edge technologies is really great to use very old, dead media. So I don't work with any specific medium, but it's more like I work with processes that are based on emergence and collective intelligence, where forms emerge from environments, systems, or networks that I create, which I guess you would call protocols. And these environments and systems could be, mixture of chemicals, where chemical molecules interact to produce new, novel forms, like in some of my projects, where they are forms between life and non-life, or between, millions of citizens, workers online, termites that build, their houses, and I'm kind of intercepting and capturing their work. So I've been working across different media, always in the same way, the building environment, protocol, system, network, where a form emerges in an uncontrolled way. And so the works in this exhibition, actually they're both brand new works that I just developed the past couple of months, and they are in a dialogue. They are both related to language and systems of communication, both are related to a question of recursion or recursivity, which is really present in my work, and feedback loops, which you mentioned before. So my recent show, for which both these works were developed at Marian Goodman Gallery in New York, titled Recursion, presented various processes all based on collective intelligence and recursion. And recursion is a process that unfolds in biological systems. It also unfolds in AI systems, but there are very interesting problems there. For example, the fact that recursivity consists in, for example, like a system adapting when there is an error, and then kind of this error or new data being folded back into the system. But the question of recognizing an error as an asset, not as something to eliminate, but something to fold back in the system, is something that biological evolution does very successfully, but that AI systems don't often do, and then hence of questions around AI and creativity, AI and malleability and elasticity, porosity. So these questions really interest me, and this is the relationship of all these works to protocols, so through recursivity. Both works that I'm presenting here are related to setting up protocols and systems that are based on recursion, and so they are both related to language. And just maybe 2 words about the work that is presented upstairs in the black box video room, Phantomatics, which is inspired by my conversations with the Polish science fiction writer Stanisław Lem, whom I met when I was in my 20s, and he was Polish like myself, and also to my ancestor, my relative, Ludwig Zamenhof, the creator of the language Esperanto, to whom I'm related. So Stanisław Lem had this idea that maybe there will be one day a synthetic reality that we will create in which languages will evolve without humans, completely, by themselves. And I realized that now using AI, it might be possible. So I've been in a dialogue with a computational linguist, Gasper Begusz, for about a year and a half, and Phantomatics is a result of this collaboration where we trained an AI on about 8,000 languages, essentially almost all the languages in the world, and to generate completely new ones with complete grammar, syntax, and names. And what transpired out of this, because then after creating this, we created 100 languages, and then we vocalized them. So in the film you hear AI voices vocalizing, speaking sentences in each of these languages, and then each of the languages is assigned a color. So it's a film without images essentially, but you see a different color. And so what transpired through this project is that obviously this disembodied voices of AI that are speaking these languages, that, languages appear in a particular environment. We need our bodies, feelings, love, death, pain, economies, currencies, power systems. They all contribute to how our languages evolve. And then what we did is we evolved new languages without all these things, like in a petri dish. So what turned out is that they are kind of like, the voices speaking them are like philosophical zombies, and like essentially like this thought experiment that first, developed by Robert Kirk and more recently by David Chalmers. Philosophical experiment. What would it be like if we had beings identical to humans but completely devoid of consciousness? And then these, the voices that you can hear in the film, they are very real. Children, people of various backgrounds, nationalities, various accents, and they speak, and they are essentially zombie beings, disembodied. And so this work is in relation to Wordoid that Hans-Ulrich described. So this is a different approach to language and protocols of like how languages and communication systems evolve, because this is putting multiple people in a dialogue without words. So I collaborated in this case with 3 neuroscientists, Adam Horowitz, Antoine Belmer, and Philip Tolka. 2 of them are computational neuroscientists, so they use very often AI to look at interactions between brains. This is a very new branch of science, looking not just about studying an individual brain, but how brains interact. And so in this case, we have put in a feedback loop, essentially, in communication, in conversation, several brains. So first, one person was asked to think about qualia, so about things that are difficult to express in language, and again, related to thought experiments and philosophical questions. So subjective experience of color, smell, taste, but also pain and joy. So this person was thinking about all that, and we were using various methods of hyperscanning to scan their brain. And then using AI, we created 3D forms, and for this, I'm using a special holographic screen, which is a new military and pharmaceutical technology that is really a 3D screen where you have 150 lenticules, which means that the film, it's a real film, but it looks different from each of the 150 angles. So one person whose brain was scanned, and this, using AI, we generated the 3D forms. Then these forms are being shown to 2 more participants, and we're scanning their brains, their brain waves with multiple hyperscanning devices, and then this is being fed back into the system to create a feedback loop that unfolds. So this is more like a neural alignment than an exchange of messages, thinking about what kind of communication we can deal with in the future, and how changes in collective and individual subjectivity can happen because of this non-verbal methods of communication.
Amazing, Agnieszka. You've answered all our questions. Big round of applause for Agnieszka Kurant. And it's also really great that you talk about Stanislav Lem, because I think he anticipated many of the ideas discussed here in the exhibition. And I also went to interview him in Krakow in the late 90s with Johanna Mikowska. And by that time, he declared that it's kind of interesting in relation also to what we discussed earlier about scientists involved here. He had decided that he's no longer a science fiction writer, but a scientist. So he did not agree to the interview unless I had a scientific background. So I got the German Academy of Science to write a letter to say that I'm a member. And the interview went really well for about an hour, and it started to be a bit shaky when I mentioned Tesla, because he said a real scientist wouldn't quote Tesla, so it was a bit on the edge. But then unfortunately it ended very abruptly about an hour 10 when I mentioned Tarkovsky, because obviously Tarkovsky did this amazing film Solaris, but he really did not like it, so he basically threw us out. So Johanna and I, had to, in the snow of Krakow, it was before one could kind of call it Uber, so you had to walk for something like an hour. It was kind of a drama. Anyway, but you also mentioned feedback loop, and as we mentioned at the beginning, pioneers whose work we should revisit. He's not really worked with AI, while it's the reason we haven't put him in the show here. But in relation to feedback loop, I think we should also remember here the work of Roy Ascott, which I think there's an interesting connection between you and Roy Ascott, who of course is also the teacher of Brian Eno. We're very excited now to move on with the next conversation. Please give a very warm welcome to New Models. We already with Joshua, went into the online marketplace of ideas, bringing together so many different references, more well-known references and also obscure references and niche sources, and creating these amazing dialogues between them. And you said actually in the context of that of New Models, that artists function maybe less as creators of objects and more as providing a sort of lens to understand the complex digital environment, a translator of protocols maybe of some sort. I wanted to ask you to speak about that, but maybe also about the way protocols shape media structures and agency within your own work, and maybe also to tell us more about what are the protocols for the media of the absolute presence, or as we call it with Douglas Copeland, Schumann Bazaar, the extreme present, and maybe also the future.
Okay, super. Well, obviously this is so exciting because we're not necessarily artists. We, like Joshua Citarella, run a podcast and we run a community, and we're all kind of, not excommunicated from the art world, but we at a certain point about 10 years ago found that the content layer was no longer transmitting the ideas we wanted it to transmit. So we were very, very depressed. And then we thought, well, maybe it means because the idea of art is actually just bigger than the content layer. And of course, people since Duchamp have been telling us this, right, even longer. And we thought, okay, well, if the content layer is like increasingly compromised, then what are the components we have? Well, we have content, the art picture, the piece of music. There's a whole emoji pack in your phone that is the content layer. But there's also the protocol layer, the rules that allow a work to circulate. So the white cube is a protocol. A protocol need not be digital. The Paris Salon is a protocol. And I think, what we've gone through is this transition from linear media, where the content layer worked very well, to network media. And that's kind of the protocol that we're showing in the online marketplace of ideas. In a way, all the weird things you see in that room are a material precipitate of the Web 2 protocol. That is where the protocol layer touches down in human space. And as Josh mentioned, it may look really ridiculous to have a BBC that says call our daddy, which is like the name of a very successful podcast in the United States, or like a plushie by Daniel Felsted and Jen Leung of a GLP-1 Ozempic, right? It seems ridiculous. But in network media, we start conducting affect. We start influencing publics through affect, through this kind of ridiculous ephemera. And we thought, okay, well, what if we just collected all of that in one place and looked at it? What is that as a cultural force? I think you were joking that this is actually the American Pavilion.
Yeah. The real American Pavilion. Because, obviously, a huge American export right now is actually ideologies, plural, and
ideologies, maybe.
Or ideologies, yeah. As Josh has said, sometimes I even think of English, because all of the social media platforms, most of them, aside from TikTok, I guess, originated in the United States.
Yeah, half your phone is America. Every time you open your phone, welcome to the USA.
Which is why it's encouraging. There's all this discourse around building a Eurostack now. Yeah. But it's almost like English has become this kind of disease vector for internet brainworms across the world. And I think, all of the objects in that room represent meme plexes, are very large and sticky and grabby ideologies, sometimes even almost an ontological way of understanding the world. And to some degree, I find it, when you see the material traces of these things, they almost seem impoverished in a way that this is the only kind of sign that reaches out of screen space, that reflects massive kind of new arrangements of social bodies and
the
ideas.
The culture that shaped the worldview of millennials.
Yes,
that
exactly.
is the material trace. We don't have, antiques in our basement, or clothes, closets full of clothes handed down. We have Tupperwares of podcast T-shirts and mugs and bumper stickers. Like that is the cultural ephemera. Those are the heirlooms we're passing on to our children. Basically, that's the choices.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. No, I was just trying to remember like a strange quote to follow on what you said earlier. It was something along the lines of slop is the media that protocols and platforms make through humans.
Yes,
right?
That's a great arrangement.
But I do want to push back on this idea of you saying that you're not artists, because or at least maybe like poke on that a little bit, because I think what's quite interesting about this room, and also what you and Julian and also Josh has been building, which maybe a lot of people in this room won't know, is over the last decade, and it's been a decade since we've been talking about this, and I think that there's few in the world that you can trust more for better kind of media, or kind of meta media analysis than you all. Is build communities, kind of like build these like little splinter societies that, as this room kind of shows, slowly there are new conversations dropping in Art Magazine du Jour, being like, oh wait, maybe they had a point, right? But of course this has been a 10-year long kind of struggle. You're producing books, you're producing exhibitions with communities sometimes of anonymous people, and also I think producing a lot of guidance and kind of a lot of guidance and kind of momentum and hope in some cases for many. And so I'm really curious for more people in the room to understand that aspect of your practice, and I want to kind of honor and acknowledge it for the room. Yeah.
One thing maybe I would mention as well is that I think this does kind of serve as a archive in a way of like the last 20 years of 10 years maybe of, well, it's mostly 10 years of ideas and new social arrangements that have been generated kind of primarily through these online platforms. But I do think it's interesting, people are now vibe coding essentially entire social media apps, and I really think that what we're kind of on the precipice of is maybe a dissolving or decentralization of all of the Facebooks and Instagrams that we know into even probably larger arrangements, organizations of social bodies and collectivity that is
urbanization of it in a way of social media.
Yeah, but I also don't think it necessarily has to be. It almost makes it sound like provincial or negative in a way. And I think that there is a generative potential from this. But I think what we see in that room is kind of a foreshadowing of things to come, probably on an even greater, but more influential scale.
Yeah.
On this topic of foreshadowing, I think at the bottom of the iceberg of the exhibition is that these media entities, which we will often mistake as being a newsletter or a podcast or what have you, are the organizing signals around which we will found new 21st century institutions. So that was a very difficult thesis to advance a decade ago. And now we have in the United States, forgive my American context, but we have the podcast election. We have content creators who have formed political organizations. There's really a spread of different new social institutions within the exhibition. There are guilds, universities, some people are claiming to make cities and even countries. You also have politicians who have themselves become content creators. So the Mañanera, David Adler is somewhere here, but Claudia Scheinbaum in Mexico hosts a daily news conference that is broadcast on YouTube, which is the most watched program in the country. You also have Gavin Newsom, who has become himself a podcaster. And so these things are beginning to work the other way around. We ourselves are in some ways an embodiment of this, new models and do not research. We started a media channel and we gathered, unbeknownst to us, an enormous amount of very creative, very talented people to give I'm going to try and summarize a lot here, so forgive me, but the linear media model was basically liquidated by the internet. It crashed the price of all media to zero, and it shed all of those talented writers to their atomized substacks. That assumption made by millennials gave them the first mover's advantage onto social media at which they could reach an audience more quickly than they could the incumbents. So the galleries starting out had much smaller followings than the individual artists at SAIC who could start project space. The polls on that have now reversed. where young people, many of them in this room who have published to Do Not Research, for them to get visibility for their work, they need to now rebundle into institutions. We've been talking about this rebundling process for many years, but there's a kind of cyclical process in media where they shed and then they regather. So Do Not Research is now a registered 501c3 entity in New York State. Carly happens to be on the board of it. We have in this exhibition 3 different books that total, it's a rough number here, but around 1,200 pages. So the extraordinary volume of content that has been produced by these people as a group, not as individuals. We have another book coming out later this month, but we are ourselves kind of a living embodiment of this thing, and I think advancing the idea that this process of rebuilding social institutions is inevitable. It is a product of competition. It's a social process. If that is happening, how can we be positive actors in this space? We are making that institution.
Big round of applause for new models. Big round of applause. And it's now my immense pleasure to give the microphone to Trevor Paglen. Give Trevor a very, very warm welcome.
Thank you.
Now, Trevor, your work, Voyager, is an interactive audio installation which brings us, and we've all experienced it over the last couple of days. And for those of you who haven't done it, we invite you strongly to inscribe yourself and participate in this great experiment, actually, where we enter a hypnotic state of consciousness as part of your work. It creates an experience, as you said, which lives in the liminal space between conscious and unconscious perception. And as so much of your work, it is, of course, informed by deep research, which we've been able to follow, talking to you over the last 12 months. So I wanted to ask you to tell us more about how it's all structured, because we can choose between meet your inner child, meet your future self, meditating on nothingness, experiencing levitation, novel neural pathways, and encountering cosmic consciousness. And maybe you can tell us also more about the protocols that actually helped you make this work.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. Thank you all for being here. So the piece is a somewhat interactive installation that you go into, and an AI voice starts talking to you and leads you down these different paths and essentially hypnotizes you. But I want to talk a little bit maybe about the context for that, because it's really building on ideas that we've all been talking about for many years. You guys were just talking about like network media and the kind of content layer. But I think one of the other things that we've talked a lot about is the kind of neurological layer, you know, where there is a layer of new forms of media that, like, why the fuck am I looking at a 20-second video of somebody eating spaghetti? You know what I mean? Like, this makes no sense from like a representational standpoint or from like a old school way of, you know, talking about how images function. My instinct is that there's something neurological going on here. There's literally just something that's being injected into my brain and causing me to pay attention to this in a way that is entirely unreasonable, right? Think about any, you know, parent with their kid. Don't let them look at screens. Why? You have to protect their brain, right? We all have this sense that the media that we interact with has gotten very good at being very predatory on our subconscious or on parts of our brain that or that bypass our ability to reason or our ability to evaluate something rationally or critically. So I've been doing an extended investigation of different forms, media forms, that try to target that cognitive layer. Things like military psychological operations or stage magic. Another one of these forms is hypnosis. And the theory behind hypnosis is that if I can put you in a kind of semi-meditative space, I can speak more directly to your subconscious than I can if we're just having a conversation. And by speaking to your subconscious, I can do things like therapeutic work, help people to quit smoking, or, you know, there's plenty of stage hypnotists that like make people act like chickens or bark like dogs or do whatever. So that's, I guess, a little bit of the background where I'm coming from. The other thing I'm trying to do in the piece is that this is a very big swing for an international art exhibition, which is to make a piece that has no images, right? There's nothing to see. You lay down, you listen to this script, and it's prompting you. The images are coming from your mind. And so the kind of bet that I'm making in a world where anybody can press a button, make any image that they want, is that maybe let's invert that relationship. Instead of you prompting the model, have the model prompt you, and you conjure the image. And what happens if we do that? Because that's happening every day in the, it's a not so subtle allegory for the
When we first started talking about, our kind of dream list for artists to work with on the show, you were one of the very first names to come up as a kind of protocol artist. And I think that's one of the reasons why you so seamlessly work between media, whether it's a film or a performance or photographs, because it's really about the rule set that's upstream from that. So, we're thrilled that you're here. I wanted to kind of take a tangential question. I know that you have a background in music. It's something that we've talked about a lot and I know has influenced your work quite a bit. I was wondering how that influences the way that you sculpt time and the way that you interact with your visitor and the kind of generosity that you bring there.
So I don't talk about this that much because it doesn't come up, but I did study music composition for a long time. I was a musician touring around for a while. And the way I think about form is actually very musical. Like in any artwork I made, even if it's a visual art, I'm thinking about where's the theme, where's the motif, how is the motif being developed? These are terms from music composition, not really from visual art for the most part. Thinking about rhythm, all sorts of things like that. And it's interesting doing this piece in particular is that you are using the voice as a kind of instrument. But you're using things like rhythm and you're using timbre, but you're also using language. There's a whole field that people call neuro-linguistic programming, and it's about understanding that we subconsciously understand some words in different ways than other words, right? If I say like, Holly, you will easily and naturally enter this state, that does something different to your unconscious than if I give you an order, for example, right? And so there's a whole field of people trying to understand how we are subconsciously taking in different forms of media and what that does to us neurologically.
One last question while we have you. Do you believe that there should be grounds for a national cognitive security institute?
Yes, 100%.
What does that look like, though? Because I think in a room of people of varying degrees of kind of understanding, like most people will understand your example of looking at the spaghetti and you don't know why you're looking at the spaghetti. And then people maybe closer to the AI conversation will understand that this is about to get very fucking real.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story. I've been writing an article, mostly looking at neuroscience labs that are on the edges of trying to study this stuff. It's hard to study. I interviewed a guy at Columbia University named Raphael Yuste. And he had, a couple of years ago, done an experiment where he figured out that he could put a mouse in a black box and then shoot a laser at its brain. And by stimulating different ensembles of neurons, he could make that mouse hallucinate different objects in front of it. So the mouse would behave as if it was like running around in a maze or in a wheel. And he freaked out. I mean, at first he was like really excited. He's like, oh my God, we figured out this crazy thing about the brain. And then he said, and that night I could not sleep because, he describes it as a kind of Oppenheimer moment. And he said, if you could do this in a mouse today, I'm going to be able to like point something at you and make you see whatever I want you to see in the future. And he then went from there to start a thing called the Neuro Rights Foundation. And it's a nonprofit that is basically trying to get ahead of a world in which huge amounts of neurological data are being collected. And if you think that TikTok fucks with your brain, yeah, it can get a lot crazier.
Thank you, Trevor Paglen.
Big round of applause for Trevor Paglen. It's now my immense pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Lorenzo Senni, who brought us a whole sonic dimension to the exhibition, the sound piece, which you can experience upstairs, actually together with the work of Avery Singer, the new painting called Vanessa. It's of course something you often do, not only concerts, you create exhibitions with sound. And there are many structural affinities with protocol art. With Holly and Matt, we've been discussing that a lot in the process of the genesis of this show. But it operates from inside the language of music, as you say, rather than from a digital infrastructure. So the protocol in that sense is not code. You said it's a genre expectation. And you also say that there is a protocol running without resolution where tension accumulates. So I wanted to ask you to explain that a little bit to us, the It Oscillates piece. And then, of course, also because Holly, Matt, and I met with Ben Vickers, as I said in the introduction, 8 years ago. That was the beginning, really, of our collaboration, and maybe this exhibition wouldn't exist without that. When Ben and I called you about the way how actually crypto changes rave culture. So we did this piece for Wired with Ben called Algo Rave, but you don't call it Algo Rave, you call it Rave Wireism.
Yeah.
Exactly, and it isolates the procedural core of the dance floor-oriented music. A very warm welcome to Lorenzo Senni.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a musician point of view. So, am I the headliner? Because I'm the last one playing. So. No, I'm joking. Of course, I'm very honored to be here. Great artist. Actually, I learned a lot because, like Fabien, I didn't know before that I could fit in a protocol art and focused exhibition, and then I found out that was making sense. But in reality, me and Matt and Holly, we share stages since 15 years almost. So and me and you, we had the chance to collaborate in different things, and Adriana is a new meeting, but I'm very glad. So I work with music. I'm a musician, and my work really reflects, I think, a personal and very basic way of looking at the music that I've been subjected to. I come from a punk hardcore background, but in my region, even if you were like a punk kid, you were subjected to clubbing music. I'm coming from Rimini, like the mecca of clubbing, especially in the 90s and the 80s and the 90s. And I was happening to be there without knowing what was going on. And when later in the years, I started looking at the music that I was listening without, again, like knowing much. And I started to understand that there was something more that I could work with. And this music was trance music, art style, hardcore, not punk hardcore, but like proper gabber hardcore. And my friends were like expert, but I was just a punk kid. And I started to reaching out and say, like, can you send me some of those things that you were listening at the time? And I figured out that I was interested on a specific section of these tracks, and this was the build-up. If you have a club track or club-oriented, dance floor-oriented music, you have a very specific way of constructing those. And one specific section was very interesting to me. It was the build-up. This build-up was functional, was important, but was a very open field for the artist to express themselves. So you had this, the first part that was a kick, boom, boom, just to explain that, boom. And then you had the breakdown. And then the build-up have this function to build up the tension to the kick again. Everything else than the build-up to me wasn't really not interesting. It was what we call the genre. But the build-up was the part where every artist could express themselves. The one that you could tell have a more musical background, the one that was more minimal in their approach, more aggressive. There's a lot of talk. So I was like, okay, I like this, and what's going on in this? And to make it short, I started to cut those from hundreds of tracks and started to playing those collages in the context where the promoter were having me playing. But what I realized that the input was very strong to the brain of the people that were there to dance. but something was never coming. That was the resolution of this. And the more aggressive the people were coming to me, and I realized I was powerful. This, very simple mechanism and this expectation that we all have, that if it's not resolved, it's become to be a problem. So that become what I working for 15 years, and what I brought here is just one of the many deviation of that way of looking at this mechanism, and how also socially create some disturbance and something that very interesting. The piece is named It Oscillates, and it speaks about a series of rules that never really resolves, are freezed, and are looked at them as they are without the need of anything else. And so the piece is up there in the first one.
You always hear about, by the premiere of The Rite of Springs by Stravinsky, that the audience kind of stood up and was, up in arms because they're expecting this kind of resolution, and it's this really atonal kind of piece. So it sounds like a kind of today's version of The Rite of Spring. It's the forever drop.
Musical edging.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me to observe how even many years after people know now how to expect from me, they still can get over to the fact that it's not happening. So that is, again, is very interesting, even if we are conscious, but as we said before, it's something that is somehow programmed in our mind, and it's very difficult to get away.
Thank you so much. Big round of applause for Lorenzo Senni. And I'm actually so glad that you mentioned Rimini, because there is a kind of an interesting connection there to protocol, because many years ago I met this incredible Italian semiotician. He now passed away in 2020, called Paolo Fabri. And he's of the same generation as Umberto Eco, but he's less known because he always refused that his work would be frozen into books. He hated this idea that because a book would somehow be a final statement. So he only talked, but he was really seminal in creating this incredible rumor about Valerio, because his brother had a nightclub, so it connects to music, in Rimini. And this mysterious thing happened at a certain moment in the later 90s that all of a sudden, all over Europe, lots of people started to scream Valerio at night. You remember, it became an urban rumor. And then people didn't know how to stop it. And a lot of people thought that it might have been Paolo Fabri's idea. In any case, he was a scholar also of this idea of rumor. And he prompted us to do an exhibition when we worked on Mutations, the show with Rem Koolhaas about urbanism, called Rumor City, where we looked at the rules of rumors. And maybe there is actually, for our next research, a connection. Your remark on Rimini made me think for the first time that there's maybe a connection between rumors and protocols, because rumors are about rules for transmission, rules of verification, rules of mutation. Anyway, it's a bit far-fetched, but maybe there is a link. In any case, the next speaker and our last speakers are now Terra O, and we are so excited that they are here, because actually it all began when I encountered their work in an exhibition Simon Denny curated. I think it was called Proof of Work. It was at the Schinkel Pavilion, and it was a very important exhibition analyzing the kind of presence of blockchain. There was also the religion there in which Avery Singer was involved, and I encountered for the first time there this work being an autonomous forest, a self-governing forest. And then, of course, when we began the dialogue with Holly and Matt, I realized that you are friends and had dialogues for many years. Maybe you will also introduce them?
Well, yes, when we were thinking about kind of canonical protocol works, of course, the autonomous forest is one of the most important, I think, for us that we really wanted to recognize. And so, yeah, we're honored to have you here. Do you want to talk a little bit about the project?
Sure, yeah, let's do this. First of all, thanks for that you invited us, of course. We're really happy to be here. I think it's a great canon you made almost, and I think this is a beautiful exhibition. So maybe I'm start with saying something controversial. The artwork itself is not here. The artwork itself is a forest in Germany, which is governed by a legal body, which we designed, and various smart contracts, so various decentralized programs running on the blockchain, and a specific protocol, and all of these are essentially kind of framing or are entangling a specific protocol. So in a sense, we started this project almost 10 years ago. And we wrote a white paper in 2016 which kind of proposed what would happen if a forest could be governed by smart contracts, could be governed by autonomous agents. And we were always interested in executing this, and we did various small iterations of this project in various forms and institutions. And 4 years ago, and this is kind of the prehistory to the artwork which is outside, so excuse me for being maybe a little bit long. 4 years ago, or 5 years ago? 4, let's say 4. 4 years ago, we were approached by LRS Foundation, which gave us the opportunity to actually do the research and work with lawyers, work with people who are programmers, work with people who can bring both of these fields together, ask ecologists and all these kind of things which need to be done to do this in a bigger, I would say almost protocolized land art work. And this work is now actually live, so you can see it when you go to the website, you can participate in it. There are certain structures which seem to be bureaucratic, but some of them are also more DAO oriented, so the whole association has a part which is only digital, and but it has also a certain part which needs to be sort of registered legally in the German law, or anchored in the German law. And yeah, this is basically for us the start of this project, because we launched this last year. And what you see here in the exhibition actually is a flag, which for us is always a kind of symbol, which is almost like a branding exercise for this institution. And it's something we do through the years, which various projects, that they all have a sort of branding, because for us this is part of an institution, and I think this speaks also to other works here which deal with these topics. The other small thing you see are chairs, and the chair is for us a place in an organization in which something takes a voice, or something can have a stake. And since we're dealing a lot with these democratic processes, with questions of who has to say what, who has to vote for what, the chair itself became for us almost like a symbol of showing various constellations of governance. And the chairs in the garden are really almost like a kind of small sculpture you can move around and sit on and discuss. And I think this encapsulates hopefully the work a little bit.
Well, thank you for being here. As Hans mentioned from the beginning, it was quite clear we cannot have a protocol show without inviting Terra Zero. But the second part I'll say thank you is actually in trying to kind of articulate some of these ideas over the years. Actually, the project that you've done specifically on the autonomous forest has been the most useful for me, because in many cases when you're describing what a protocol is to someone who's maybe non-technical, in one sentence you can kind of convey both like the kind of beauty and poetry and also the function of something when you discuss, it's a forest, how about we change the rules so that a forest could govern itself? It's a very, very beautiful and poetic thing, and so even better in the spirit of Glitch Residency that you're actually doing the damn thing, right? That it's no longer poetry and you're actually doing that. So thanks for being here and thanks for doing that. I guess my only kind of question for anyone in the room is, you know, are there any ways for people who are maybe also inspired by this idea to participate going forward?
Yeah, also from me, thanks for inviting us to the show and being part of this discourse. There are actually like many ways to participate in autonomous forests specifically. So there's an online community, you can just join and like look at the discussions, see what's going on. You can also become a part of the community council, we call it, which also has like a legitimate voice in like the next or upcoming like decision which are made by this council. By buying a plot of autonomous forests, staking it, which means we are using NFT or blockchain-based token systems for this, which are to some extent like a speculative medium, of course. If you abstain from like this financial speculation by freezing it for a specific time frame, it's like 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, whatever you choose, you get in return governance tokens. So you say like you're really committed to this project. In return, you get like a democratic voice in this in autonomous forests, and then you can vote on how we allocate the budget we raised last year, which forest we buy next, and and if you're really committed in participating in this project, there's even a third layer of becoming a legally bounding part of the general meeting of the Verein, which is like a German representative legal structure which holds all of this.
Big round of applause for Terra Zero. Thank you.
Thank you.
Will you continue to buy forests? Like, is that the plan to keep? Okay, great, cool, very cool. Amazing.
It's reality production. This is the end of this mini marathon. Thank you all so much for being here, so many of you on such a busy day. All our thanks go, of course, to the artists for their extraordinary contributions. I want to thank again Holly and Matt for this amazing dialogue. I want to thank also, big round of applause. Thank also Mario and Adriana and the amazing team here. We should give them a big round of applause. And also invite you all to come back here on Saturday, because on Saturday will be the launch of the book of the project actually which preceded, in a way, the exhibition where Holly and Matt were involved. It's a project which Lorenzo Marsili and I curated about the question of universalism. The question, in a way, how we can rethink a common horizon in the 21st century, very much inspired by Suleiman Bachar-Diagne. And it will be a very special tribute to the late Alexander Kluge, who very sadly passed away some weeks ago, the polymath filmmaker, poet, writer, lawyer, TV producer. It's an endless list of activities of Alexander Kluge. He was very, very involved in this universalism project, developed a deck of cards which you can rediscover on Saturday here. They're going to be relaunched, and it will be the book launch. And if you have time, there is also the last work of Alexander Kluge is part of the Holy See Pavilion, which happens in 2 venues. It happens actually near the Arsenale, near Via Garibaldi. That's where the Alexander Kluge films are. He created 12 films the last weeks of his life as tribute to another extraordinary polymath, Hildegard von Bingen from the 12th century. And then there is a show because and I curated in the Mystical Garden near the railway station. So we hope to all see you on Saturday, and thank you so much.